Welcome, and I see some names that I recognize, so it's nice to see you, or at least just to see your names. I'm going to be talking about why talking about money is so hard, but I invite you to both participate, ask questions, let me see you, let me hear you, because this is really a very personal topic. So let me share the screen now, if I can figure out how to do this the way I want to. So I think that's okay. So this is what we're talking about. And so some of this is the blurb that I wrote to kind of advertise this, and I want to get some of your reactions to this. Some of the most difficult and awkward conversations we have seem to be about money. Why is that? There are many things to discuss with our family and friends when it comes to our finances, yet those conversations often don't take place. If we do have those conversations, we frequently end up feeling embarrassed or ashamed. In this session, we'll look at why we feel that way and what we can do about overcoming those feelings and having pleasant, productive conversations about money and our finances. I'm going to kind of focus on the family rather than a broader question of whether we should be talking about or how we talk about money with folks other than in our family. But I invite you to bring whatever questions that you have or whatever opinions you have to this. The other thing that I will tell you about myself is that I'm much more familiar, having done it for a long, long time, working in person with folks. So my just looking at a screen now with names there sometimes gets me to babble or not. So I'm going to invite you now. Is what I've said here true? Are the conversations that you have about money difficult and awkward? Do you have conversations? Or do you just avoid these things and just let things fall as they may? So if one or two of you can unmute yourselves and just say some responses to those questions. Are your conversations difficult and awkward, and why? Why are they?
Well, I guess a lot of our role modeling might be viewed as coming from our parents, my parents certainly came through the dirty 30s and the Depression, and really, as I was growing up as a young man, there were minimal conversations about money. Didn't really know how much money my dad made or anything like that. So I think some of us then, I think people are getting better at that now, trying to teach their kids or grandchildren about sort of the value of money and the role that it can play in a family and all the various kind of decisions that are viewed in relationship to that. So I'll shut up now and let somebody else crank in.
Okay. Shauna says, I talk about money, but I find others think it is awkward. So that makes it awkward for me, and I wonder why. Anybody else have any comments on that? Well, I wonder, did whoever was just speaking, because I'm sharing the screen, I can't see the indicator of who's speaking. Did your parents discuss money? Do you think your parents discussed money, or was this just up to one of them?
No, we really didn't discuss money at all. As a young buck, I had a paper route, and that was my first exposure to money coming into my hand, and then kind of figuring out how to spend it. But really, there certainly wasn't any counseling on that. The other efforts that we had then with money was when was coming out of university. I paid through, got married early and went to university. And then when I graduated, we needed to buy a house eventually, and then got into sort of certainly discussions with my dad about mortgages and financing and stuff like that. But it wasn't kind of a common topic. And I, even though in raising my kids, I had 4 kids, we really didn't give them a lot of background and knowledge about money and how to deal with it, how to handle it, how to budget for it, how to plan for it. And that would be one of, I guess, my shortcomings. And in spite of all of that, they are all doing quite well financially. So who knows?
That's good.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm Doug Calder, and logged in under Don Calder, but we share the computer.
Okay, good. Thank you, Doug.
Yep.
Donna Whitelaw says, I do not tell others how much money I earn. I don't think it's anyone's business. That is a very common thing. I've done this session before, and many people say that. I won't ask Donna what she does, but I want to show you something. Do I still have it? Yes, I do. I was part of the Faculty Association Union. I was at the university for a long time. I have a PhD. Do you know what my salary is? Just look at the screen. We were in a union. Contract was public. It may not be anybody else's business, but it's available. If you're a teacher in the province, there's the basic salary. If you know that somebody has got class 4 and they've been teaching for 10 or 11 years, you know exactly what their salary is. It's interesting to think about this in terms of who you want to tell and how you want to tell it to them. That's why I'm focusing this session really on family. Yeah, I agree. It's none of my friends' business for me to tell them how much money I'm making or not making. On the other hand, I think it's important that my family know. And it's certainly important that my spouse knew, so that we could make our plans and work together as a team. Carla B says it can be awkward if you make less than your family and friends and cannot afford to go on vacations with them or to fancy dinners. Okay, we're going to come to that. What money means. But let me tell you our story, my story. So this picture obviously was taken during COVID. We have our masks on. We were actually waiting for our booster shot. We took that picture. We've been married a long time. When we first got married, we had a fairly traditional relationship. And what I mean by traditional relationship is that I worked, Helen was still going to school. I earned the money, I paid the bills, I gave her an allowance, and we moved on that way. As time went on and Helen started to work, I went to school, things got a little bit weird because every time I went to spend some money, and Helen agrees with this, Helen is my wife, we both felt a little bit guilty. We're taking money out of the family pot. Were we depriving the other spouse or kids of some, if we were buying ourselves something? So when I bought a suit or when I bought or something like that. So there was guilt involved in terms of using our money. There was the monthly anguish of paying bills. I would sit down, you know, with all of the envelopes, with the credit card statements, and I would look at it and I would think, how do I stretch the money to make sure that we get through the month? And of course, every time I used a credit card or Helen used a credit card, we worried about what it would mean at the end of the month. And then there were the busy times of the year. So the holidays, birthday times, summertime, summer camps, sports camps, the beginning of school, new clothing, all of that. And we were going through this process where I was the man of the house, therefore I took care of the money. Helen managed the house, and I didn't want to restrict her, and she didn't want to have to ask. And it was getting kind of awkward. And we were irritated with each other because I'd look at those bills and I'd say, why are you spending all this money on face lotion? She'd say, why are you spending all this money on books? Because we weren't talking about this, we had a problem. And then about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, Helen's father had an accident. He got a brain injury and he became incapable. And we watched Helen's mother try to figure out everything. She didn't know where the bank accounts were. She didn't know where the checkbooks were. She didn't know anything. And both she and her husband had full-time jobs. They were reasonably well paid, but yet everything fell on her. And Helen and I sat down and discussed that and said, we can't go on the way we're going on, because if I drop dead, what will you do financially? And if you drop dead, what do I do with the house, with all of that kind of thing? And so we started on a process of talking about a zillion things. And it wasn't easy because, as you've said in some of your notes, it's nobody's business. It's awkward. There are issues in our history about money that are problematic, what we've learned. And so here we are. This is what we know about money. Money is the root of all evil. That man would sell his soul for filthy lucre. Money grubber. We live by the golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules. Happiness is not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement and the thrill of creative effort. You're not rich until you have something money can't buy. There are no pockets around. If you make money your God, it will plague you like the devil. These are the things that we hear all the time. These are the things that were kind of in the atmosphere as we were growing up, sometimes from the religious organizations that we were involved with, sometimes from our family, sometimes from our friends, but it just seemed not right to want to pay attention to money and to talk about money. That got many people into trouble. So, once again, I'm going to ask you to be involved in this. What keeps you from talking about money? We heard one person say, I'm not going to tell people what I earn because it's none of their business. But what keeps you talking about money in your family? What keeps you from talking about money with your spouse? And again, I'm going to turn it over to you and invite your conversations.
Am I on the air?
You are on the air, Barry. Hello.
Good to see you, and also Helen's picture. Gwen and I were both teachers, and we made roughly the same amounts of money. And so there was not, we would have the odd discussion about what we're going to do with it, but it was, I think, never really controversial. And of course, anybody that knows about teachers, they know roughly what they make, or you can certainly, as you point out, find out. And within our family, our kids always knew what we made or what we were doing with money. So in that sense, we've been very fortunate. Our parents, both Gwen's and mine, talked very little about money. We've talked about it quite a lot with our kids, and I'm not sure if it was advice, whether it was good advice or not, but it was just from our own experiences. But I did want to just divert a wee bit, and the book that Helen recommended to us, Red Notice by Bill Browder, and the oligarchs. Now that's mega money, and that was so interesting about. I know it's not family in that, but it's money on a grand scale, if I could use those words. But that does need to be talked about as well.
Right. Well, what's interesting, Mary, is that some of the research that I read while I was preparing for this was that people with a lot of money, more than enough money, typically have fewer conversations in their families about where and how to spend their money. And it is typically people with lesser income. And if you think about the logic of this, spending money is always trade-offs. I can spend my money on going to a movie, or I can spend my money on buying lunch. If I have a limited amount of money, and those are the two things that I have an option doing, and I can only do one of those two things, it is more likely that I'm going to discuss that with my partner or with those people involved. And if I have more than enough money, and it's just a matter of time, whether I want to devote the time to going to a movie or devote the time to having lunch, I might be able to do both. So frequently, the conversation about money has to do with allocation of money. What does somebody else have to say about what keeps you from talking about money? And the second question with this is, and what effect has that had on the quality of your life or your relationship? I'm not looking for personal information with it. I just like your general notion of why it's difficult to talk about money and what the effects are if you don't talk about money. It's hard to volunteer when we're on Zoom. It's easier for me to tear you down when we're face-to-face. Okay, I will please encourage you to say anything that you'd like, ask questions, make comments about what we're doing. Money means a lot of different things to people. Money has to do with emotion. The comment that we got a little bit earlier is that it's embarrassing. You don't have enough money to do the things that other people are doing, keeping up with them, participating with them. There is emotion involved with that. There is irritation, or there is sadness, or there is frustration, or there is a sense that you're not worthy. Money connotes success. If you have a lot of money, it means that you've been at least financially successful. But it also means failure. And some of the failure happens when you're looking at what other people are doing. Anna says, my family of origin didn't talk about money. And I found it caused me to make a lot of financial mistakes along the way. I had to learn the hard way. Yeah. I know that we discuss money with our children as they were growing up, partially because I'm in the business of financial education, but partially because we wanted them to avoid mistakes that we could see. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Money looks at, or money indicates failure. And as I said, sometimes it's relative to what other people are doing. You know, I have $5 million, but my neighbor has $7 million, and therefore I'm not as good as they are. I'm a failure. Or at the other extreme, I'm not able to support my family, and my kids have to go to work right away, where other people are financially able to send them to school and allow them those kinds of things. Money means responsibility. If I have money and I'm responsible for the financial welfare of my family, I'm responsible for using it properly. That is a very, very heavy responsibility. money reflects my character. And this is where society is really very, very interesting with it. So we see a person who has been very good with their money. They've been able to handle the money well, they've invested well, they've been able to develop a reasonable life for themselves, perhaps coming from a poor family, and they have, through their hard work and intelligence and good decision making, have made their family comfortable. And we kind of respect that. We also respect people that give away their money, that are philanthropists and are charitable. And those two things may or may not be incompatible. So the person that took good care of their family may not have been as charitable as a person that was charitable, but yet didn't spend quite so much money on their own family, their children, all of that thing. We're very conflicted about how money reflects on our own self-worth, on our own personality, on our own character. And the suggestions that the research says, and that I've been using for the last number of years when we do this, is think very, very carefully about how money makes you feel. The actual money, earning the money, allocating the money to be spent, giving it to other people, using it for yourself. How does that make you feel? Because those feelings need to be part of the conversation, especially when you're working with family, organizing. I see that I have a couple notes on the chat. I'm getting it. Down here. Money can mean power and can be used by having power over someone else. For instance, a spouse, parent, or siblings. Absolutely. For their kids. What attitude that goes, well, you owe me for your education, or I bought you the car, or you're an equal partner. As a lot of it on reality, and a lot of it is on relationship. And how we talk about net worth, it does suggest a relationship between our money and our worth. So net worth is a financial calculation, and self-worth is how we see ourselves. Does a higher net worth increase our self-worth? Not necessarily. It has to do with what we measure success, how we measure success. Peter just told me that the connection was unstable. I hope all can hear me still. Whoops. Okay. So money has many meanings, and many of those meanings, because of the filthy lucre background and the emotions that are connected, those meanings sometimes interfere with our ability to communicate. But we do have to communicate. What should we talk about? Why should we talk about it? Well, we should talk about it for the three reasons that I have here. Being literate financially, and I will explain what that means in a minute. Should be talking about money so that we can make plans, and I will talk to that a little bit. But the overarching issue about why we should talk about money is harmony. Getting along with the people in our sphere in ways that make them feel that they have power within the sphere, that they have ownership, that they understand the decision-making that goes around allocation of money. Using money is an economic issue. Economics looks at what resources do we have? How do we allocate those resources? how do we increase our resources? And when we increase those resources, how do we use those resources? And the experience that I've had personally and that the research tells me is that the more inclusive that team is, the more sense that team both understands limits of the resources, if they're small or even if they're large. And then the choices of allocating those resources to the various demands that we have, the happier people. Okay. So the question becomes, what is financial literacy? In order for us to have good conversations, we need to both understand what our circumstances are and then have the tools to be able to work in those circumstances. Financial literacy is the ability to understand and effectively use various financial skills, including personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. So those are the three kind of mainstays. Personal financial management. How do I earn money? How do I save money? How do I keep my money secure? How do I use my money? That would be budgeting. And how do I get my money to work for me? That would be investing. That's where money makes money. I can use my money for my own benefit in many ways, besides the investing kind of thing, although we use the word investing. So I could invest in education. Education will likely mean that I'll have more resources to spend on myself. That would be my personal financial management. The investing that I'm looking at here is the money making money for the larger life questions of it's appropriate so you and education. Those are all kind of investments in your person, in your team, but they're not the kind of investing that I'm talking about here. Financial literacy is the foundation of your relationship with money, and it is a lifelong journey of learning. And that's what some of us old people have to remember, that we're still learning about money. For many years, I didn't know anything at all about tax-free savings accounts because it didn't exist. When they came into existence, I needed to learn about those things because it just rely on my old skills. And this one is crucial, and I keep on asking the folks, Tamara and others, how do we get more young people involved in these? The earlier you start, the better off you will be, because education is the key to success when it comes to money. So thinking about money, talking about money, using money in planned, rational ways always works. It's never too late to start. But if you start when you're 20, you're an awful lot better off than if you start when you're 60. So here are some things to know about Canadians in terms of financial literacy. These are quotes from some of the studies that I looked at. We're also seeing exceptionally low levels of personal savings, poor retirement preparedness, and an increased regular use of high interest credit. For example, 1 in 3 people occasionally relying on credit for day-to-day expenses when they're short on funds. This is from 2000. You can see the dates there, around 2019. We were in a very low interest rate environment for quite a while. That is changing. People are responding to that now in terms of what their day-to-day expenses are. We now have inflation that we haven't seen in 25, 30 years. We have higher interests on our best interest loans. And the implication in this paragraph is that a lot of people use credit cards, which is high interest. PISA, which is the Program for International Student Assessment, ranked Canadian 15-year-olds as second overall globally on financial literacy. And that's a good thing. And suggested that young people who handled their own money and who talk regularly about money at home are more financially literate. So there's something for you, your children, your grandchildren. The more you talk about money, the more you allow children to handle money with guidance, with advice, with some instruction on what sensible, appropriate allocations are, the better off. But the most worrisome thing for older folks is that Canadians say that they're preparing their finances for retirement, but a majority can't describe their plans, or do they feel that they have sufficient resources to live the way they would like to live when they retire. Some of us have the benefit of defined benefit retirement plans, but not everybody does. Many people have to plan their own retirements. If there is no discussion in the family about the plan for today, the plan for tomorrow, the plan for next week, the plan for next year, the plan for 40 years from now, we're in more trouble. Stop for a sec and ask if there are any comments or questions at this point. Shame of instability, my computer internet instability dropped me off from this, and I was talking, and you weren't able to hear me. Somebody let me know that you're there, just to make sure that we're still connected. I got a chat. So it must be. My plan is not to retire, Sean. I understand that, but sometimes you want to retire. You eventually want to retire. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do about overcoming all of these issues that we've had in terms of the obstacles to talking about money? What do we do to get over that sense that when we talk about money, we're money grubbing? When we talk about money, we're admitting our failure, not providing enough for our family. What do we do when we think about the obstacle of it's not anybody's business? This came from an article that I read, and at the end of this, and I will post these slides, is a slide. I think there's only one slide with resources, and this article is part of it. The answer is just start. Sit down with your spouse and say, we have to. This paragraph says, I promise you it will be hard at first, and the differences between you and your partner will be pronounced. I grew up worried about money. For me, money was about scarcity and security. My wife grew up in a family where money was used as an opportunity to build a business. So they took risks with their money. For her, it was about abundance and freedom. When we were married, we had no idea that our different views of money might require years of work to reconcile. I relate to that paragraph deal. My wife and I.
Cyril, can you hear?
That were.
Oh, we lost you there for a second, Cyril.
Uh-oh.
Why? The last thing we heard you say was, I relate to that paragraph or that quote. There we go. That sounds better.
It dropped off, and then it reconnected me again. So I was going to say, let me check this. Anna says she looks forward to retiring and do the things that she wants to do, and I agree with that. So I was saying how I related to that paragraph that I put up. I will leave it like this now for a sec. Yes, technology is wonderful. I related to it because my wife and I, as it turned out, had very different conceptions of what to do under certain circumstances. Now, we both agreed on, helping our kids and paying for school and all of that kind of stuff. But it was on little things that were irritating us and how we solved the problems. And I think I mentioned that when I went to pay the credit card bills at the end of the month, it would always irritate me that my wife spent money on makeup and lotions and nail polish and all that kind of stuff. She always looked beautiful to me, whether she used that stuff or not. And so I've told her that repeatedly, and then I would say, and why do you need to spend all of this money to it? And she hadn't realized that I was irritated by that. She was irritated by the amount of money that I spent on books. I'm a university professor. I like books. I have thousands of books. And we discovered that by discussing this, we at least surfaced that. And then we created a solution that reduced the frustration for us. The solution was quite simple. Everything goes into our common pot. My income, her income goes into our common pot. We pay our bills through that common pot. We pay those bills together. At the beginning of each month, I write Helen a check for her allowance. And at the same time, she writes me a check for my allowance. She has a separate bank account into which deposits her allowance. I have a separate bank account in which I deposit my allowance. We've agreed it's none of my business how she spends the money in that bank account. We've agreed that it's none of her business, but I spend my money in that bank account, as long as we don't go over our allocated allowances. So now when Helen buys her lotions, she puts it on a debit out of that bank account. I never see it. She still looks beautiful to me for whatever reason, whether it's the lotions or just her natural beauty. And I buy my books and do what I want with my money, that account, and she never sees it and she doesn't get irritated by it. That came as a result of a discussion. And we also look back on that. And as silly as it seemed, I was grouchy at the end of the month. And part of that grouchiness was because I saw those things that irritated me. Now, that really wasn't a substantial problem in our lives, but much of the rest of it was how much money to spend on birthday gifts, how much money to spend on holiday gifts, how much money to spend on anniversaries. We found those questions to be very, very important for us to discuss so that we could come to an agreement on it. And then it kind of headed off some of the disagreements that we might have. So we allocated, I remember, $100 for birthday gifts. Well, Helen decided that she wanted to buy one of our children something, and it was $200. We discussed it, but both of us were able to fall back on the fact that we had budgeted $100. Why would we make an exception this time? And if we didn't make an exception this time, was it fair to the other kids that we weren't spending $200? If we were going to spend $200 for birthdays on our children, what about their spouses? What about our grandchildren? And that evolved, and we finally came to an agreement and a conclusion on this. We wouldn't have had the discussions. We wouldn't have been able to come to that kind of agreement. And we probably would have ended up fighting for other reasons, but that were instigated by this. Okay, I read those articles. Let me share a screen again and see where I am. Uh-oh. Need asked to be, sorry about this, asked to be the host again. So still on this slide, the solution to the question of how do we do it is just sit down with the person who you want to have the conversation with and say, let's talk. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward, but here are the reasons that we need to do it. We need to avoid controversy. We need to come to agreement. We need to decide how we're going to spend our money. And it's not going to be easy. And we may not agree on a lot of things, but the more we talk about, the more we'll be able to do that. Okay. So I've described a number of these things. Doing the planning and budgeting together is a stress relief. The fact that you and your spouse, you and your partner, you and a child have agreed that you're going to talk about it. Yes, there's stress in the conversation, but it takes away that overarching stress of I want to do this kind of thing. I don't know how they react to it. How do I do it without getting them to react appropriately? All of that kind of thing. I guess I should have put the second one first. Failing to plan is planning to fail. A plan allows you to make decisions outside of that stress zone. Yes, there's always stress in allocating money over a period of time. But if you make decisions, if you have conversations about what is going on, what will be going on in the future, many banks say start your Christmas savings fund now in the summer. It's only 8 months until Christmas or 7 months until Christmas. You want to plan for the future, and those plans, those discussions are an important part of making those plans. Doing a budget is a good incentive for family discussions. Where and how do you want to spend our money? The point is, we talk about vacations. We talk about where we want to go next year or the year after. We should add on to that conversation, how are we going to pay for it? Are we going to put away a little bit of money each month? Or are we going to wait for the Christmas bonus? Is one of us going to get a part-time job? How are we going to deal with this? The planning and the conversations allow us to avoid secrets. This was the issue that a number of my friends encountered when it came to kind of hobbies. Like, how much money are you really spending on that toy train set? How much money are you really spending on your skis? How much money are you really spending on? And once you start the discussions and everything is on the table from a family perspective, you can avoid secrets. And as I explained with my wife's lotions and my books, it can satisfy guilty pleasures. I don't need all of the books that I have. I buy a lot of books that nice to have. I've done my job without some of those books. I live my life without some of those books, but I enjoy buying them and I enjoy reading them. And maybe that's a guilty pleasure. I don't know. Maybe it's an appropriate pleasure, but it's something that I like to focus on. And because I have agreement from my wife that my allowance is a certain amount of money a month, I feel that I can spend it on anything that I want. And so I satisfy my guilty pleasures. The discussion reinforces discipline and organization. Every time I talk about this one, I think about getting a buddy to go to the gym. I occasionally go to the gym. I think that I'm guilty enough that I need to work out or do something. But all of the research tells us that if you do it with somebody, you're kind of a self-monitoring pair. And it encourages you to be organized and to have discipline, to in fact do it. So the conversations that my wife and I have, the decisions that we make, the agreements that we come to, I feel more morally bound to honoring them because we had those conversations. It's not just a discussion that I've had with myself and a promise that I made to myself going to the gym. Shauna says for each person to spend without having to account is a good idea. Absolutely. That's something that I would support. Absolutely. You've heard in my own life how good that's been for us. But the conversation to decide on what money gets allocated to that is an important decision to make, important conversation to have within the family unit. I don't know if you can hear it, but they're cutting the lawn just outside my house, and I hope it's not interfering hearing what I have to say. Crisis intervention, having conversations about what do you do if this happens. So the conversation that my wife and I frequently have, getting a little bit older, and it's everything is possible, is if I become unavailable for some reason, I have a stroke or whatever, drop dead, what are you going to do about paying the bills? Do you know how to access our online accounts? Who will you talk to for our investments or my pension? What will you do in that crisis? And because we've had those conversations and because we've kind of planned things out, and I'm a big believer in writing things out. So we actually have written plans for what to do under certain circumstances, who to contact, how to contact, all of that kind of thing. If we wouldn't have had that conversation, for some reason I become unavailable and my wife has to take care of all those things the way her mother did, she would be at a disadvantage. And then without making plans, without having the conversations, how do we know that we're actually achieving our goals? How do we know whether we're moving forward in the same way? One of my children is interested in buying a house now. And I've been encouraging this conversation that for her to have this conversation with her husband for years. If your intent in the long run is to buy a home, what's the conversation that you can have about getting ready for that, about accumulating enough money for a down payment, about the trade-offs that you would need to make in order to get an adequate down payment, all of those kinds of things. So the core, to kind of summarize this, the core issue in a family, in a partnership, it's a family or sort of a family, is to ensure that the conversations happen. And then the question is, what are the conversations about? And the reality is the conversations are always about allocation of resources. What resources do we have? How do we want to, what obligations do we have? How do we want to allocate those resources towards our obligations? And we could talk about wants and needs and all of those kinds of things. But the crucial thing for this presentation, we engage in honest discussion and resolution, decision making. So we've got 6 minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can go to the next slide to show you that there's a series of resources there that I'd encourage you to go to. I got some of the information from these resources. There are many others that you can find on the internet. But I'd like to hear now that you've heard my story, I'd like to hear what you think are the issues that you will need to confront to engage in these kinds of conversations. Or are there other circumstances besides the family that you'd like to ask about? Stop the sharing. Where to move in event of need? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, still. And I will wait for you, Lucille. There. To another province. Well, don't move to Vancouver Island. It is the real estate here is beyond expensive. It is the cost of living in the last little while has increased a lot. I don't really have any advice about what to do in circumstances like that. But something that I was going to say, if there are no other questions, about talking about what your income is. Somebody earlier on in one of their comments said, I don't tell my friends what I make because it's none of their business. The research actually is really interesting on coworkers talking about what they make. In non-unionized situations, individuals, employees who tell each other how much they make often end up making more money than in circumstances where people don't talk about how much they make. And that's because you do comparisons. You look at people that are doing similar kinds of work to you, share what your incomes are, and you discover that this person is doing substantially the same work that you're doing, and they're either making less money or more money than you are. And that bit of information inside those circumstances is very valuable. One more question here. How to make income work in a climate of inflation? Do I sell my house and downsize all my expenses? Well, I wouldn't give any kind of advice about selling your house in the circumstances like this. But I would say look very carefully at what your expenses are, and look very carefully at, in terms of budgeting, where your wants and needs are. So, for instance, looking at the kinds of, I want to say disposable, I'm not getting the word, the kinds of expenses that are under your control. Holidays, for instance, the kind of transportation that you use your car and pay for gas, or take a bus, or ride your bike, all of those kinds of things. Thank you, Edith. Edith says, I've opened my eyes to some reality. Thanks. Great presentation, Cyril. I appreciate that. We have 2 minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions. As you can tell, I like to respond to what folks are saying to me. I know stuff that I'm talking about, so in some ways, responding to your questions makes it a little more interesting. In your examples about coworkers discussing incomes that vary, what would you suggest be a solution? Well, I'm a supporter of unions, to be honest. But in non-unionized places, people could talk about what their incomes are, and then tactfully and appropriately speak to their employer about equity is very important. Catherine says, I used to worry where I spent every penny, but now I just think I have less money and always seem to have money to spare. I live well within my means. And that's where things start, Catherine. Absolutely. That's where things start. Living within your means. My wife and I found that when we budgeted, we were much freer with our money because we knew that we had budgeted $400 a month for entertainment. And so we went to the movies. We went out for dinner. We spent the $400. And we knew that spending that $400 wasn't going to take food off the table. It wasn't going to take food out of our children's mouths. We still would be able to pay for their activities because we had budgeted and we knew where the money was going. So yes, living within your means is important. Knowing where your money is going and feeling free once you've made those decisions that you can spend your money appropriately. I see the hour is up. Tomorrow, do we say goodbye? Do we announce the next ones? How would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you so much, Cyril. That was great. And thanks to everybody who participated and everybody who offered comments and questions. That was just great. So yeah, please check our website. Cyril does have two more presentations coming up in spring term. One is in May about virtual banking, and then the next one is in June, and it's about personal finance in retirement. So please do check that out and get registered. And I do see I see another comment here, Sarah, before we sign off.
Right. It's Doug saying it's his second marriage, and his wife and I have our own assets, and then we share with common expenses. They have a great system. Cheers to all. Is the list of resources going to be shared? I will put the PowerPoint up on the website. I think people will have access to that website afterwards. Thank you. One of the things that I will mention is that if you have ideas for presentation sessions that I can do, please let Tamara know, send me an email. We're always looking for this kind of thing.
Yes, we really appreciate those suggestions for sure. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the session for now, and hope to see several of you at this evening's presentation. And thank you to Cyril for your time and presentation today. Really nice to see you.
Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Enjoy the afternoon.